Now here with the latest evening headlines, it's the ITV News.
Calls on the government to investigate new allegations of Islamophobia within its ranks. Nusrat Ghani claims she was sacked as a minister partly because of her Muslim faith. She says Boris Johnson told her to make a formal complaint, but that he couldn't get involved.
They're very serious allegations. We will tolerate no discrimination, let alone Islamophobia, in the Conservative Party.
Also ahead, Russia denies UK claims of a Moscow plot to install a pro-Kremlin leader in Ukraine. And after 5 days, fearing the worst, relief for the woman in Wales whose parents survived Tonga's volcanic eruption.
This is ITV News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. After a week in which his leadership has been under intense scrutiny, today Boris Johnson was drawn into a fresh controversy. It's after the Muslim MP Nusrat Ghani claimed she was sacked as a minister in 2020 in part because of her faith. That extraordinary claim has been denied by the government, but Number 10 says she did meet with the Prime Minister. Ms Ghani said Mr Johnson told her to make a complaint, but that he couldn't get involved. Our political correspondent Daniel Hewitt has the details.
Boris Johnson is tonight at the centre of yet another controversy, this time over claims by his own MP, Nusrat Ghani, that he failed to take seriously her allegations of Islamophobia at the heart of his government.
Nusrat Ghani.
Mr Speaker, this government is committed to improving...
She was the first female Muslim minister to speak in the Commons, but in February 2020, Nusrat Ghani was sacked by Boris Johnson as Transport Minister. When she asked why, Ms Ghani says a government whip told her her Muslimness made colleagues feel uncomfortable, that her faith was raised as an issue in Downing Street, and that she hadn't done enough to defend the party against allegations of racism. This man, Mark Spencer, the government's chief whip, says Miss Ghani is referring to him, but strongly denies he ever said those words, describing her claims as completely false and defamatory.
They're very serious allegations. We will tolerate no discrimination, let alone Islamophobia, in the Conservative Party. I think the other point here, though, of course, is that Nuz has been, and as she has been advised, is free to make a formal complaint, which would trigger a formal process, as you'd see in most walks of life.
Downing Street today said Boris Johnson met with Miss Ghani personally in July 2020 to discuss her extremely serious claims and later wrote to her inviting her to make a formal complaint, but she didn't. Tonight, Nusrat Ghani released a statement in response. I urge the Prime Minister to take it seriously as a government matter and instigate an inquiry. He wrote to me that he could not get involved and suggested I use the internal Conservative Party complaint process. This was very clearly not appropriate for something that happened on government business. All I have ever wanted was for his government to take this seriously, investigate properly and ensure no other colleague had to endure this.
I admire her courage, undoubtedly. And I think that the point she has raised, we must wake up and say, well, let's look into it. And the way to establish what really happened, I believe, is to have an investigation. But that investigation must be undertaken by an independent person, not somebody from within the party.
And despite Downing Street's denials, those calls for an independent inquiry are tonight gathering pace.
So, Dan, serious allegations at what could be the start of a critical week for the Prime Minister.
I think it will be a critical week, Lucrezia. We're expecting Sue Gray's report this week into all those alleged parties at Downing Street. It's no exaggeration to say that right now Boris Johnson is fighting for his political life. On this story, Downing Street's attempts today to diffuse this haven't worked. We've seen Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, come out and say this needs to be investigated properly. Note the word properly, given that Downing Street have said they've already looked into this. Last night we saw Nadhim Zahawi, the Education Secretary, saying this has to be investigated properly again. These are members of the cabinet calling for an investigation independently into one of their own cabinet colleagues, the government's chief whip, the Prime Minister's enforcer. The timing of this could not be worse. The Prime Minister's position right now is perilous. He faces the very real prospect of a vote of no confidence in his leadership. He needs the support of all the backbench MPs he can get. I can tell you tonight, Nusrat Ghani has a lot of support on the backbenches. They are very unhappy with how this has been dealt with. Boris Johnson faces the real prospect of having to fight for his political life in just a few days' time. Absolutely remarkable.
All right, Daniel, interesting week ahead, I think. Thank you. A Ukrainian politician who the UK believes President Putin wants to head up a new government in Kiev has tonight described the idea as absurd. The Foreign Office took the highly unusual step of naming figures it believes Moscow wants to install as Russian troops mass near Ukraine's borders. Dan Rivers reports.
Russia's military build-up around Ukraine is continuing this weekend. Here, Sukhoi Su-35 fighters were filmed heading to neighbouring Belarus, officially for drills, but many in the West fear they could be deployed in anger in the event of an invasion. Last night, a press release from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office here in Britain claimed it has evidence of a plot between several Ukrainian politicians and Moscow to install a puppet government after any attack. At the centre of the alleged conspiracy is this man, Yevhen Murev, a Ukrainian politician who's allegedly being lined up as a potential compliant leader of a pro-Russian regime. Tonight, he dismissed the British claims against him.
It's absurd because I've been under the sanctions of the Russian Federation since the 1st of November 2018. I've been denied entry to Russia. I represent a threat to Russian security.
Today, the chairman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee said the allegations should serve as a wake-up call to the world.
Well, I hope that Murev has now been discredited. He's certainly denied any relationship to Putin. And I hope that others who are linked to Russia today are wondering how much of their secret conversations are about to become public. And I think this is now a moment for NATO and indeed for the European Union and many other countries around the region to stand strong.
This is a highly unusual intervention by the Foreign Office. While it names several Ukrainian politicians allegedly involved in a Russian plot to set up a puppet government after an invasion, there is little other detail. The Russian government has greeted it with disdain, telling Britain to stop spreading nonsense. Ukraine's military continues to prepare for the worst, its troops readying themselves for action with exercises as the US rhetoric gets ever more
Somebody
robust.
said two recordings.
A single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response.
This massive military build-up might be an elaborate Russian bluff, but if it's not, the West could be on the brink of a dangerous escalation with President Putin. Dan Rivers, ITV News.
Our senior international correspondent John Irvine is in the Ukrainian capital tonight and sent us this update.
Tonight, the most threatening Russian army units are roughly 150 miles from where I'm standing. They're in Belarus, about 10 miles from the Ukrainian border. Moscow says they're there for joint military exercises that are scheduled to finish on February 20th. By then, the Russian troops will be fired up and ready for anything. Coincidentally, February 20th is the day the Winter Olympics finish, and there's a suspicion here that Vladimir Putin won't want to go before then for fear of upsetting his friends in Beijing by taking the shine off their games. Also, Russian medal winners will be a good way for him to stoke patriotic fervour in Russia. The next working week will see diplomatic efforts continue. The Americans are due to deliver a written response to Moscow's demands they've already verbally called non-starters. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, is scheduled to visit Moscow for talks with his Russian counterpart. So in terms of negotiations, there'll be plenty to be seen to be done. But what none of the Western powers or the Ukrainians know, for that matter, is if the Russians are actually negotiating in good faith.
John Irvine reporting from Kiev in Ukraine. A 16-year-old boy fatally stabbed in Manchester has been named by police as Kenny Carter. 5 teenagers have been arrested after the attack, which happened in Stretford just before 7 o'clock last night. The man has been charged with assault after 2 Aston Villa players were hit by a bottle thrown from the crowd at Everton's Goodison Park. 19-year-old Roger Tweedle is accused of throwing the bottle that left them on the ground on Saturday. He'll appear in court next month. And the Queen is understood to have been flown by helicopter to Sandringham. Her Majesty had been staying at Windsor Castle due to rising COVID cases. She's expected to remain at the Norfolk estate for the next few weeks. After 5 days of panic, a woman in Wales has spoken of her relief at finally being able to contact her parents in Tonga after it was struck by a volcanic eruption and tsunami. Siniva Felicei said hearing her mother's voice was the best sound in the world. Lewis Warner has her story.
Entire villages left in ruins. People left without food or water. Tonga is now having to come to terms with how this once beautiful landscape now looks. 10,000 miles away in Barry and with communication cut off, Siniva Felicei was left waiting. She spent 5 days consumed with worry after not being able to contact her parents, who still live in Tonga.
I panicked. I went through all different emotions, the feeling of despair, helplessness. It's like watching something so horrible live from afar, and you can't even lift a finger to help.
The conversation Siniva longed for finally happened over a crackling phone line.
The feeling of relief when I hear her voice, and of all the worry that I went through, and it's making me laugh. She said, "Oh, how are you?" And I almost cried and said, "Oh, we are fine." You know, it's like nothing major happened. And it's a typical Tongan response, you know. They're very resilient, and just to hear her voice, you know, it's the best sound in the world.
Thankfully, both escaped without major injury. Lewis Warner, ITV News.
Finally, to the Premier League, where Liverpool have closed the gap at the top of the table. They won 3-1 at Crystal Palace. It puts them 9 points behind leaders Manchester City with a game in hand. And in the late kick-off, Chelsea beat their London rivals Tottenham 2-0 at Stamford Bridge. It is the 3rd time they've beaten Spurs this month, following their Carabao Cup victories. And that is all for tonight. So from me and all the weekend team, enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.